I was living in Houston, Texas. This is the scariest thing that ever happened to me. I remember heading to a camp in Alexander, about 45 minutes away from Colorado. 4 other people joined me on the adventure. We were having a good time, doing things like hiking and kayaking. Nothing unusual happened that day. After a while, we set up our tents by the Arkansas River, where we planned to go rafting the next day. But I had a terrible night of sleep. Inside my sleeping bag that night, I kept waking up over and over. When I finally checked my watch, it said 3:45 a.m. I figured it was a good time to step out of the tent for a bit. I put on my shorts and shirt, opened the tent, which was facing the river, and right after I unzipped it, I noticed something. There was someone standing in the middle of the river, downstream. He wasn't wearing a shirt, so I was super confused. I looked harder, and after a moment, I realized it was my friend, Delton. I called out to him twice. But he didn't answer. I ran as fast as I could and pulled him out of the river. I asked him what the hell he was doing standing in the middle of a river at 4 a.m. He just said he had no idea how he got there. Maybe he was sleepwalking. When I told the rest of our friends what happened, none of them believed me, so we decided to just forget about it. But honestly, if I hadn't woken up and stepped out of the tent, my friend Delton might have been dead. This happened to me when I was 13 years old. I was the quietest kid in the scout troop. I wasn't shy, but I just couldn't connect with any other kids. We were at our last camp of the 2008 camping season in October. The weather was cold, so we did a lot of outdoor activities like hiking. This would be the last camp of my life, and you'll soon find out why. We were hiking as a group, and after a while, I suddenly needed to pee. I let the group go ahead a bit and went behind a tree. And then, out of nowhere, I felt something weird. Something caused a sudden chill down my spine. Not too far from me, I saw something moving. At first, it looked like a tree branch. But then I realized there was someone there. Maybe I saw their feet. I honestly didn't know what I was thinking. All I knew was that I was terrified. I ran back to the group, completely unsure of what just happened, so I didn't want to tell anyone. We headed back to camp, and I crawled into my tent to sleep, but suddenly, I heard a noise that seemed to be coming from my backpack. So I tried to figure out what that sound was. After searching through my bag, I pulled out a walkie-talkie that was super heavy. It was the one thing I definitely didn't carry or own. Then, I heard a deep voice come through the walkie-talkie, saying, "I'm walking." I pressed the talk button and asked, "Who are you?" but got no response. I stepped out of my tent, and suddenly, I felt something push me. I screamed loudly. And then the scout leader came over. I told him about the device I found in my backpack and explained what happened. He gathered the kids for a talk, thinking it was just one of them messing with me. But when things calmed down, I told them the voice was way too deep. That whole situation forced us to share tents that night. The next day, we moved to a site closer to the camp. My name's Corey, and I've spent a lot of time camping, climbing, and hunting in the wild. I've seen all kinds of predators and found myself in tough situations more than a few times. Last July, I went on a camping trip at my family's farm in western Iowa, USA, with my friend Alexa and my best buddy Jason, along with his girlfriend, Samantha. Iowa is a huge wildlife haven in America. Heading out for an adventure there can be a big challenge. We had to watch out for snakes, poisonous bugs, and mountain lions. We found a clearing at the top of a small hill surrounded by a few trees, and we decided to set up camp there, even though we were deep in the woods after hiking for miles through a trail in the middle of the forest. After preparing dinner and setting up our sleeping arrangements, we went to bed around midnight, aside from a few mosquito bites. Everything was going as planned until I suddenly woke up to Samantha screaming. I opened my eyes and found my friend's girlfriend awake too. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the tent. Jason was already trying to calm Samantha down, reassuring her to take a breath and explain what was going on. She said she saw a huge shadow moving around the camp, scratching the tent and making a terrible noise. I told her it could just be a coyote or maybe a mountain lion attracted by the trash we left outside, but I promised her I'd stay awake and rekindle the fire. Jason and I took turns keeping watch because the fire and our movements were supposed to scare off anything lurking around. That made her feel safer, so she went back to sleep with Alexa while Jason and I stayed outside near the fire. We couldn't see anything wrong or suspicious. About half an hour later, I was still sitting by the fire when Jason went to his tent to grab something. I was starting to feel tired when I casually glanced to my right and saw a shadow. Something was moving close to the camp. I wasn't sure if it was real or just my imagination. I kept watching for a few seconds, and then I heard a loud rustling sound. That's when I knew something was definitely moving, and my friend heard it too. He hurried over to ask if I heard what he just did. I told him I did and suggested he get his weapon from his bag just in case. While my friend stayed there, I went to grab my bag and pulled out some powerful flashlights. We stood there by the fire, constantly scanning the area. We aimed the lights toward the sound we heard, and for just a second, we saw what looked like a huge gorilla disappearing into the trees. At that moment, I tried to stay calm while my friend looked completely shocked. We heard that loud growling and screaming all night long. I had never heard anything like it before. The rustling and banging sounds kept coming from the forest around us, and we could see something moving either to our right or left in the open space. That night was extremely tough for both me and my friend. I kept the fire burning and tried to feed it by tossing in sticks constantly. As soon as daylight started breaking over the horizon, I woke the girls in the tent, and we packed our stuff and began to leave. On our way down the hill, we found massive footprints in the mud. I can't describe them other than to say they literally looked like the footprints of a man but several times larger. Whatever we saw that night wasn't a man or even a gorilla. It was something that's supposed to be a mythical creature, with no real proof of its existence. Honestly, I have no idea what it was exactly, and I don't know if it was trying to harm us. I don't know if it belonged to one of those big-footed creatures only a handful of people have ever seen in real life. And honestly, I don't want to know. I'd rather not dwell on it, just glad we survived that night. That's all that matters to me, and I won't let it stop me from camping and exploring the wild. I think encountering those scary wild creatures in the wilderness is part of the adventure. This happened when I was 12 years old, back in 1987. It was a hot summer night in July. My younger sister had two friends from our street over. That night, we decided to have a camping experience in our backyard. We lived in a small community with just a few houses facing each other in a circular layout. The downtown area was only about 5 minutes away, and it was pretty common for kids and even teenagers to camp out in their backyards. Nobody thought it was dangerous or unsafe. That night, I decided to set up a tent in the backyard and camp out there. A few hours later, it was past midnight. I was sitting in the tent when the girls came over and asked if they could come in. Before I could even ask why, one of them said she thought she saw someone watching them from the side of the house. I thought they were just imagining things, so I told them they could come in as long as they kept quiet and went to sleep. But as soon as we got inside the tent, I could tell they were really scared. Honestly, it made me a bit uneasy. One of them said she and her friend heard something by the house. They said they saw a man lying down and looking at them from the side of the house. I zipped up the tent and felt a wave of worry for a moment, but then I realized we were just in the backyard and our parents were home. The neighbor's house was only a few meters away. While I listened to them talking about seeing a man, I thought for a second it was just a prank. I figured they were trying to scare me, and I still wasn't completely convinced about what they were saying. I opened the tent zipper a few centimeters and poked my finger out to show them that there was nothing outside. But what happened next was totally unexpected. When my finger was hanging outside the tent, I literally felt someone outside place their finger against mine. It was one of the most terrifying moments I've ever experienced. I felt a rush of fear immediately, and then things got worse before I could process what was happening. Someone outside started kicking the tent, and the front of it collapsed, making it impossible for us to open it and escape. I told my sister and her friends to scream as loud as they could so our parents or one of the neighbors could hear us. Then I heard a rough voice from outside saying, "No one can help you." We kept screaming for what felt like 30 minutes. But it was probably only about half a minute at most. I saw the neighbor's bedroom light turn on from inside the tent, and moments later, I noticed the light on our back porch came on as well. I heard a voice outside saying, "You kids are being too loud, get out of the tent." I was the first to come out, followed by my sister and her friends. When I stepped out, I saw a short man leaning against the side of the house, holding a cigarette. I also noticed he had a badge on his waist, but I didn't see any police car nearby. I remember seeing a pickup truck parked on the street between our yard and the neighbors. Just then, my dad opened the back door, and we rushed towards him and ran inside the house. The man vanished before my dad could catch a glimpse of him. When I looked out the living room window, I saw that the truck parked on the street had just moved. I knew all the local police officers. That guy definitely wasn't one of them. I thought that somehow he had stolen a police uniform and badge and must have been looking for kids to abduct. It was all so frightening, but it could have been much worse. Even though I spent hours analyzing and discussing it, I still wondered how that man saw us in the backyard and what he was doing in that quiet area at that late hour. How did he get to us, and so many other questions. Since these are just memories from the past, I don't want to dwell on them too much. But that moment when the man touched my finger with his still lingers in my mind.